Happy 90th birthday
for the Urbana Country Club. My dad hadn't really played a lot of golf when he started the Urbana Country Club. As a matter of fact, he started golf in Pennsylvania. He was on his way to Washington, D.C. on Old Federal Highway 40, and his car broke down in Uniontown, Pennsylvania, and there's a little inn right up on top of the mountain right there next to Uniontown, and he stayed there all night with my mother, and they, I think, Clyde Marvin and Aunt Cecil's were with them at that time. I'm not too sure, but I think so. And anyhow, there was a 9-hole golf course, and he went out and hit a few golf balls, and that's where he got hooked on the game of golf. They came back, and then they talked about building a golf course in Urbana and be a private club, and they, I think the land that he got from the Johnsons at that time was part of the farm that didn't even graze cattle or anything else on it, so they gave the farm for very little money. And my dad tried to get several people to build it, and nobody wanted to do it for the fee that they were going to pay. So I think he went out and he started building the Urbana Country Club. It was trees over on number 1, 2, and 3, and the rest of it was an open field. Yeah, and there, of course there's trees down the ravine, and that was covered over years ago. But the trees he took out were really on 1, 2, and 3. How he got them out of there, I don't know. But he really was the one that ran out there and tried to build a golf course. When we first started working on the golf course, it was just watering the greens with a hose. And that's all I could carry was a hose. And I did that for several years, and then got big enough to push a lawnmower, so I started cutting the greens. They cut them the greens. They didn't have a motor on the greens mower at all. You had to push it yourself. And I would push it sideways, go down the hill, and because going up and back, and then my dad would come out and say, you have to cut it the other way, and I was pretty hard pushing that mower up and down the hill. But that's where I started at the Urbana Country Club. When I was a kid, I couldn't ride a horse. I was allergic to 2 things in this world, peanut butter and a horse. And so he bought me this bull calf to ride. Everybody thought he was crazy and me for riding it. But I had it for about a year or so, and I kept it in the backyard there, right behind our house and on Sauter Street. But you know, when I was working on the golf course, you'd go out old Route 36, and you wouldn't pass 4 cars all the way to the Urbana Country Club. So I used to ride a bicycle out there, and then a couple of times I walked, but I finally got an old, well, it was a Chevrolet pickup, and my dad would let me drive it out to the Urbana Country Club. So I got back and forth there, and right there, the house, just on the east side of it was Ernie Wilson. And he was the first, he built the golf course with my dad, and he was the superintendent there until the war. Then he went to work for the defense plant, Bob McConnell's factory there in Desmond Stevens, right? He went to work for them, and that's when I became the greenkeeper of the Urbana Country Club. That was about 1943, I'd guess, or 42 or 3. And I finally, the first year I did pretty good. The second year, I finally burned up all the greens, and my dad decided that's time for me to go in join the service. So I left. Yeah, I was down. I was with the 13th Airborne Parachute Infantry, and I didn't do anything but jump out all over North Carolina and Georgia. But and after the war was over, I had 6 months to stay in, and they made me the greenkeeper of the Fort Bragg golf course. So I've been digging around in golf courses for a long time. The bent grass was primarily on the east coast of the United States. And my dad finally got a hold of that grass. They called it velvet at that time. They didn't call it bent grass. But it was a kind of a Washington type bent. And it was still there for many, many, many years, you know, when they brought it out here. And my dad had an interest, not an interest in Scots, but he knew them over there. And they came over and they supervised the installation of the bent grass at the Urbana Country Club. What I really remember is that Walter Hagen came and played at Urbana in an exhibition. That's way back in the early 30s, I'm sure. And I remember he was sitting on the front porch of our house there on Scioto Street and having a drink and talking to my dad and a few other people there. And my dad had decided to pay Walter, I think, $500 to play in the exhibition, and they raised some money, so he was going to give him a bonus for coming there. But when my mother walked into the screen porch there on the front porch there on Scioto Street, Walter Hagen didn't get up, so my dad didn't give him the bonus. But Warren Grimes later came into the picture out there at Urbana Country Club, and he lived in Delray, and he became a friend of Sam Sneed. And Sam came over and played, I think, 1 or 2 exhibitions. And then also Byron Nelson played an exhibition at Urbana Country Club. They always had Chick Evans. He always played. He was the best player at that time. And the Caton boys were out there at the Urbana Country Club, and they were good players. But Chick Evans was by far the best player, and he would play in the exhibitions. Alice said we played one right after the war with Peggy Kirk and Fred Wampler. He was an Indiana State amateur champion. But my dad was always interested in trying to get somebody to come play an exhibition at the Urbana Country Club. Jack would come over to see Ned Kirby's son. His son's name was, I think it was Ned also. But they were good friends all when they was in school. And but Kirby always liked to hunt. And Jack would come over and they'd hunt pheasants or rabbits or whatever it was around Urbana. But I've known Jack and played golf with him since he was about 14 or 15 years of age, and still do. So good friends today. I think he caddied for Mr. Grimes someplace along the line, either in Columbus or wherever it was. But I think it's also the Kirby connection, and that's how Jack came to Urbana. And I knew his dad quite well, Mr. Ross, Mr. Nicholas. He had the pharmacy over there in Arlington. And so Jack, and I knew Jack and his mother and dad. And year that Jack always tells a story, he beat me, it was after the war, but he beat me when he was about 17 or 18 or 16 or whatever it was, in the Trans-Mississippi. And that, when you won the Trans-Mississippi, you got an invitation to play in the Masters. And Jack always talked about that changed his whole life to go down there and play in the Masters. And I said, well, you don't ever tell him about the year I beat you in the U.S. Open. He said, that didn't count, he said. But he beat me in the Trans-Mississippi out in Kansas. He then was invited to play in the Masters. The only time I ever played in the U.S. Open, I beat Nicholas. So we went to school in Delray pretty much until the start of the war, and then Dad brought us back to Urbana, and I went to Urbana High School. I didn't finish grade school, high school, or college, but I have 3 PhDs now. My mother played pretty good golf. She'd shoot 50 or 55, and she would play with Clyte's mother, Cecil Marvin, and Mrs. Howard. That's right, Bob Howard's wife. And I can't remember who else they played with, but those 3 I can remember. And I used to have to caddy for my mother every time she played, so that was one of my duties in life. But my mother loved to play golf. She played quite well at that time, and go up and down the hills at Urbana. And Dad built the first golf course. I think it was 22 or 23 or whatever it was. And then Peavy came over, and Jim Johnson had the land around the outside over there and acquired the land. And my youngest son, Peavy died, went over there, and he built the second nine that you now have at the Urbana Country Club. So there's 18 holes. I have two sons. They're also, Perry is in Denver, and he's done a lot of work in Latin America and all over. And then Peavy's done a lot of work in the Caribbean and in the United States. We're friendly competitors. The first golf pro was Al Marshy. And then I remember Tubby Guy got in there for a short time, off and on. And then Leo Wilcox was about the next one. And Leo could hit the ball farther than anybody, and he was really good. And then I think Cliff Good took Leo's job. And then about that time, I left the Urbana Country Club, and it's had a variety of different golf professionals. Earl McAllister was one of my great friends, and he was always a wonderful golf professional and always great for the Urbana Country Club. And I remember walking in there and one spring, and I said to him, "Earl, how are things going?" He says, "Not too good." He said, "Between rain and he had jackpots. He had a slot machine that you put a quarter in and you win a golf ball." And he said, "Between rain and jackpots has been a slow spring." But he was a great professional and a great person for the Urbana Country Club. One summer, while I was just married, and we were here in Indianapolis, and I had tennis elbow, but I'd always been interested in the golf course maintenance, and I always stayed in the maintenance of the golf courses from just a kid. And when I came over here, I used to sign up and go to Purdue and take all their short courses in agronomy. Didn't pass any of them, but I took them all and so forth. But I was always interested in golf course maintenance. And a fellow named Nortzik called me to build a golf course south of Indianapolis. And at that time, I had never done anything. And so it was a completely new thing to do. But I had tennis elbow, and I told him I would go down there. So Alice and I went down and we built the 9-hole golf course south of Indianapolis, and they called it, of all things, they almost died when they put the name on it, they called it El Dorado. Well, anyhow, Alice made a real nice map of this golf course, and she sent it out to all her friends, and one was Mr. Tufts, who was then past president of the United States Golf Association and owned Pinehurst. And Mr. Tufts wrote back and said it was great for us kids to build this 9-hole golf course. But he said, "Don't you think crossing the creek 13 times on a 9-hole golf course is just a little too much?" Well, that was our first letter back on the golf course. But the following fall, Dr. Harlan Hatcher from the University of Michigan was driving south from Ann Arbor through Indianapolis and going to southern Indiana. They had a lot of artists down there in that part. And he stopped, and he's about a 95 shooter, and Dr. Hatcher stopped and played that El Dorado golf course. And I say today that he probably had the greatest round of golf that anybody's ever shot in the game of golf or played in the game of golf, because when he did, he finished that, got across the creek 13 times somehow or another, and he called me and told me he was talking to Trent Jones and Dick Wilson about building a new course for the University of Michigan. And he said he would like to talk to me, and I told him that I was in the insurance business. As a matter of fact, I was the youngest life member of the $1 Million Round Table. I had a pretty good insurance business going. And I said I didn't know how to draw plans. I didn't know anything about it, and I just built that 9 holes. He said, well, for me to come up and talk to him. So I did drive up to Ann Arbor, and I talked to him. And when I left his office, his secretary said, "You know, President Eisenhower's been in here, and so-and-so's been here. Nobody's ever been in that office that long." And long story short, I built the University of Michigan golf course and came back and gave up the life insurance business and been digging dirt ever since. So I don't know, that's how I got started in the business. Fred Jones, you know, I built the golf club for Mr. Jones, and he had a farm just north of the Urbana Country Club. He's the only person I know that's ever been thrown out of the Urbana Country Club. Fred Jones was. And he was a good friend of my mother and dad, and he used to date my dad's secretary in Urbana. And Fred was quite a flamboyant type person, to say the least. And he called me up to build the golf club when I first started in building golf courses. And he was always great to me, Mr. Jones. And I remember I was over there building the golf course, and I did all the building, paid the payroll, and had a few of the friends. We had bulldozers working, and I'd tell him I'd have spent so much money, and he'd write out a little brown check, and it was never the same amount, but it was pretty close to it. And he was sick. He got sick, and he was in Florida in the hospital, and they brought him back up to Columbus. So I running out of money, and so I went down to see John McCoy, Mr. McCoy Sr., and I told him that I needed money to keep the golf course going because Mr. Jones was in the hospital. He said, "Well, he would loan me the money, but if I had my wife sign the note." And I said, "No, I won't do that. I won't do that." So he floundered around a little while, and finally John McCoy loaned me $50,000. So I went back, and we're still digging the lake on number 18 at the golf club in Columbus. And finally I kept calling Mr. Jones' secretary to see if I could see him. And finally he said, "You can go down to see him at the hospital." I think Wells Teachner was his doctor. But I went down there, and he was laying in the bed, and he was white as a sheet. He looked terrible, as far as I know. But I went in, said hello, and so forth. He said, "Well, I guess you had to stop work. You ran out of money, didn't you?" I said, "No, we're still working on the lake on 18. Where did you get the money?" And I said, "I went down at the bank, and Mr. McCoy loaned me $50,000. And Fred looked up at me and said, "What were you going to do if I died?" And I said, "Well, Mr. Jones, I saved just enough money to buy a lily, and I was going to crawl right in there with you." See, I've always loved the Urbana Country Club. I had so much fun as a kid out there playing golf. I remember starting when I was about 6 or 7 years of age, and I played until the war. But the Urbana Country Club had just been part of my life, really. And when I was working on the golf course, and I've stayed in the same line of work, maintenance and building and golf courses, it all started at the Urbana Country Club. And I had such good friends out there, and I had such a great time playing golf, and two cousins, Truman Johnson and Clyde Marvin, we played every day, and we played out there, and the tubby guy, he was a pro, and then went to work for my dad in the insurance business, but we had a lot of young players and good players at the Urbana Country Club all during the 30s, and the Caton boys and Chick Evans could just beat everybody. He was Ohio State captain of the Ohio State golf team before the war, but we had a great time at the Urbana Country Club. I mean, we used to play 9 holes, but we used to play that 9 holes 3 and 4 or 5 times in one day's time. So we'd play 45 holes and wouldn't think anything about it, just go up and down. But Truman Johnson and Clyde Marvin, we played golf together for a long, long time. I hope you all have a great time tonight, and it's a great birthday, and have many more.
I hope your wishes come